Kwaku couldn't believe what he was seeing. His own brother, Tetteh, stood in the middle of the chief's courtyard, pointing an accusing finger at him. The elders were silent, their faces grim. The villagers gathered around, whispering, their voices a chorus of disbelief. "He did it," Tetteh declared. "He stole the chief's goat." The silence felt like the weight of an entire tree pressing against Kwaku's chest. His tongue felt heavy, and though he wanted to speak, to defend himself, his voice refused to come. It had all started 2 months ago in the quiet village of Ahemfi, nestled between the lush hills and a winding river that glimmered like gold in the morning sun. Kwaku and Tetteh were inseparable, brothers who walked the fields together, hunted together, and even shared the same dreams of building a better life for their family. But despite their closeness, there was always a silent rivalry between them. Kwaku, the elder brother, was patient and hardworking. Tetteh, on the other hand, was clever but impatient, always looking for shortcuts to success. Their father used to say, "A bird that builds too fast might forget the strength of its nest." But Tetteh was never one to heed advice. One day, the chief announced that a wealthy trader from the city would be passing through the village in a month. He planned to buy goats, and anyone who could present the fattest goat would be handsomely rewarded. The reward, a bag of gold coins, was enough to change any family's fortune. Both brothers saw this as an opportunity. They had only one goat between them, a sturdy white billy goat named Sika. "We'll work together," Kwaku suggested. "We'll fatten Sika and share the reward." Tetteh nodded, but in his heart, he had other plans. Weeks passed, and Sika grew bigger and healthier under their care. Kwaku spent extra time gathering the freshest leaves and yams for the goat, while Tetteh occasionally helped but often disappeared, claiming he had other errands to run. Kwaku didn't question it. After all, they were brothers. But one night, Tetteh's true intentions were revealed. Kwaku returned from the river with water for Sika, only to find the pen empty. The goat was gone, and so was Tetteh. Kwaku searched all night, his heart pounding with fear and confusion. At dawn, he found his brother at the chief's courtyard, presenting Sika as his own. "This is my goat," Tetteh declared proudly. "I raised him myself, and he's the finest in the village." Kwaku stepped forward, anger boiling in his chest. "That's not true," he shouted. "Sika is our goat. We raised him together." But before Kwaku could explain, Tetteh turned to the chief and said, "Don't believe him, chief. Kwaku has always been jealous of me. He tried to steal the goat last night, but I stopped him." The villagers gasped. Kwaku felt the world spin around him. Tetteh's betrayal cut deeper than any blade. "Is this true, Kwaku?" the chief asked, his voice stern. Kwaku shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. "No, chief. I would never." But Tetteh's voice was louder, his lies sharper. He described the tale of Kwaku sneaking into the pen, of a struggle that never happened. The chief, unsure of who to believe, decided to postpone his judgment. That night, as Kwaku sat by the river, he thought of their childhood, of the times they had shared laughter and struggles. How could Tetteh betray him? The next morning, Kwaku made a decision. He gathered the elders and the chief, asking for a fair trial. He proposed they examine the goat's behavior. "Sika knows who his true caretaker is," Kwaku said. Reluctantly, the chief agreed. Sika was brought to the center of the courtyard. Kwaku and Tetteh stood on opposite sides. Whoever the goat walked toward would be deemed its rightful owner. The crowd watched in silence as Sika stood still, his ears twitching. Then, slowly, he turned and trotted toward Kwaku, nuzzling his hand. The villagers erupted in murmurs. The chief looked at Tetteh, his face stern. "You lied," he said. "You betrayed your brother for greed." Tetteh fell to his knees, ashamed. But for Kwaku, the damage was already done. The bond between the brothers was never the same after that day. Tetteh tried to apologize, but Kwaku's heart was heavy with hurt. He forgave his brother but kept his distance, knowing trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. And so, the story of the two brothers became a cautionary tale in Ahemfi, a reminder that greed can destroy even the strongest of bonds. Months passed, and the village slowly healed from the betrayal. Kwaku's heart remained heavy, but he continued his work on the land, tending to the crops and looking after the animals. Life had a rhythm that couldn't be easily disturbed, but there was always the quiet ache of what had been lost. Tetteh, on the other hand, found no peace in the village. The shame of his actions weighed heavily on him, and he began to grow restless. The whispers that followed him wherever he went were like thorns in his side. He tried to walk alongside his brother again, but Kwaku kept his distance, and even the villagers gave him cold stares. The gold coins he had received from selling Sika couldn't buy him the forgiveness he longed for. One evening, Tetteh approached Kwaku as he was returning from the fields. "Please, Kwaku, let's talk," he said quietly, his voice thick with regret. Kwaku paused, looking at his younger brother. The moonlight cast long shadows on the earth, and in the stillness of the night, Tetteh's pain seemed to hang in the air. "What is there left to say?" Kwaku replied softly, his words carrying the weight of time and hurt. I was wrong," Tetteh confessed, his voice shaking. "I let greed take over. I've lost my way. But I don't want to lose you as a brother. Please, forgive me." Kwaku looked at Tetteh for a long moment, the anger and hurt still simmering beneath the surface. But in his eyes, there was also a flicker of the love they once shared, the shared childhood, the memories of laughter around the fire, and the dreams of a future together. "I forgave you the moment you asked," Kwaku said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't erase the wound you've caused." Tetteh bowed his head, his shoulders sagging with the weight of Kwaku's words. "I understand," he said. For weeks, Tetteh worked hard to regain the trust of the villagers. He stopped seeking shortcuts and began helping wherever he could, from repairing broken fences to planting new crops for the harvest. His efforts, though not enough to fully restore his reputation, began to soften the coldness around him. Yet, Kwaku remained distant, not because he didn't forgive, but because his brother's betrayal had taught him a painful lesson. Trust, he realized, was like a delicate flower that, once crushed, could never bloom the same way again. One day, as the season changed and the rains began to fall, Kwaku found himself at the river once more. The same place where he had sat in sorrow when Tetteh betrayed him. But this time, the river felt different. The water, though still deep and powerful, no longer seemed to carry the same weight of bitterness. Tetteh arrived, sitting beside his brother without a word. Together, they watched the water flow, the sound of it soothing in the quiet of the evening. For the first time since the betrayal, there was peace between them. The years of rivalry and hurt were not forgotten, but they no longer dominated their every thought. Finally, Tetteh spoke, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I know I can never undo what I've done, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, not just for you, but for myself." Kwaku nodded. "I don't expect you to be perfect, Tetteh. I just want you to be honest with me and with yourself." From that day on, Tetteh remained by his brother's side, not with grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of kindness. The brothers worked together again, side by side, their bond slowly mending like the cracks in a clay pot that had been carefully patched. The village, too, began to see Tetteh for who he was becoming, rather than the man he had been. And so, life in Ahemfi returned to its rhythm. The fields flourished, the goats thrived, and the river continued its endless journey toward the sea. Kwaku and Tetteh still remembered the pain of betrayal, but they had learned that forgiveness, though not easy, was the only way to heal. And sometimes, it was through the deepest wounds that the strongest bonds were forged. Years passed, and the brothers worked together, their bond growing stronger with each passing season. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer ruled their lives. Tetteh had become a respected member of the village once more, not because he was flawless, but because he had shown true remorse and earned the trust of those around him through his actions. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden light over the village, Kwaku and Tetteh sat on the porch of their modest hut, sipping palm wine. The air was warm, and the sounds of the village, children laughing, goats bleating, the occasional crow of a rooster, filled the space around them. Kwaku looked at his younger brother, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You've come a long way, Tetteh." Tetteh smiled, though it was tinged with a touch of sadness. "I still feel like I have so far to go," he replied, his voice reflective. "But I've learned something important from all of this, that strength isn't just about how many goats you can sell or how much gold you can accumulate. Strength is about the courage to face the truth, to admit your wrongs, and to make amends." Kwaku nodded. "You're right. The things we value when we're young, they are fleeting. But the things that truly matter, the trust between us, the love of our family, the strength of our community, that's what lasts." Tetteh looked out over the village, his mind drifting back to the time when he had been driven by greed. "I was a fool," he said softly. "I thought I could take the easy way out, that the gold would fill the emptiness inside me. But it didn't. It just left a hole. A hole that only time and honesty could heal." Kwaku smiled gently, his face softening. "We all have our mistakes, Tetteh. It's not the mistakes that define us. It's how we rise from them." The brothers sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past now lighter between them. Eventually, Kwaku spoke again, his voice steady and sure. "You've proven yourself, Tetteh. Not to anyone else, but to yourself. And that's enough." Tetteh turned to his brother, gratitude and a quiet peace filling his heart. "Thank you, Kwaku, for not giving up on me. For showing me that I didn't have to do it all alone." Kwaku chuckled softly. "You were never alone. Even when you thought you were, I was always here, even if it was just waiting for you to come back." They both stood, and Kwaku placed a hand on Tetteh's shoulder. "Come. We've got work to do before sunset." Tetteh grinned, his eyes sparkling with a renewed sense of purpose. "Yes, brother. Let's get to it." Together, they walked into the fields, side by side, their shadows stretching long in the golden light of the evening. The work was hard, but it felt lighter now, as though the weight that had once separated them had finally been lifted. And as they walked, the village of Ahemfi, with all its simple joys and hardships, continued its steady rhythm. The past no longer held its dark sway over Kwaku and Tetteh, and though life had its challenges, they faced them together, not as rivals, but as brothers, stronger, wiser, and united in the way that only true forgiveness can make possible. The chief, who had watched the brothers' journey with quiet observation, often spoke of them in the village square. "Kwaku and Tetteh remind us that the road to peace is long," he would say. "But when brothers are willing to stand together, there is no obstacle that cannot be overcome." And so, the tale of the two brothers, of betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption, was passed down through the generations, not as a story of failure, but as one of hope. A story that reminded the people of Ahemfi that no matter how far one might stray, there is always a path back home. As the years went by, Kwaku and Tetteh became known not just as brothers, but as symbols of resilience and redemption in Ahemfi. Their farm flourished, and the land they once struggled to cultivate now yielded crops so abundant that even the neighboring villages sought their advice. The goats they raised became a source of pride, their herds growing larger with each passing year. But even with their prosperity, it was the unity between the two brothers that everyone admired most. One day, When the village gathered for the annual festival to celebrate the harvest, the chief called Kwaku and Tetteh to the front. The air was thick with the sweet scent of roasted yam and fresh palm wine. The children danced in the center, and the elders spoke of the old days. But the chief, with a solemn expression, turned to face the crowd. Today, I honor two men whose journey reminds us of the strength it takes to overcome one's own heart. Kwaku and Tetteh, though the road has not always been easy, you have shown us the power of forgiveness, the importance of family, and the value of honesty. The crowd cheered, their voices filling the air like birds taking flight. Kwaku and Tetteh stood side by side, their hearts swelling with a quiet pride. They had come a long way from the brothers who once stood in the courtyard, facing the stain of betrayal. But there was more to be done. After the festival, as the sun began to set, Kwaku and Tetteh sat beneath the shade of a large baobab tree, a tree that had stood at the heart of the village for generations. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it the promise of another season of harvest. "I've been thinking, Kwaku," Tetteh said quietly. "Maybe it's time we teach the younger ones what we've learned. Not just how to plant crops or raise goats, but how to build a life that's rooted in trust and understanding." Kwaku looked at him, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You mean, like passing on our story?" Tetteh nodded. "Yes. There are many children in the village now. They need to know that life isn't just about what you can take, but what you can give. They need to know that true strength comes from how we rise, how we help each other, and how we heal." Kwaku thought for a moment, and then smiled. "You've always had a way with words, Tetteh. Maybe that's exactly what we should do. Share our story. Not to make ourselves heroes, but to show them that even the most broken things can be mended." And so, the brothers began to teach the village's children. They gathered them under the baobab tree, where the shadows of the past were replaced by the promise of the future. Kwaku shared his wisdom about hard work and patience, about the land and the seasons. Tetteh, with his easy way of speaking, taught them about the value of integrity, of standing by one another even when things seemed impossible. Together, they created a new legacy, one not defined by what had been lost, but by what had been gained through redemption and healing. As the years turned into decades, the village of Ahemfi continued to thrive. The children who had listened to Kwaku and Tetteh's story grew into adults who carried those lessons forward. The brothers, now older and growing at the temples, still walked the fields together, though the land had become less a place of toil and more a symbol of the love and care they had poured into it. The village flourished not only because of the crops, but because of the spirit of unity and forgiveness that had taken root deep within its heart. One evening, when the brothers sat together on the porch of their now larger home, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Kwaku turned to Tetteh. "You were right, Tetteh," he said, his voice full of contentment. "The strength of this village wasn't built on gold or goats, but on the trust we've shared, on the forgiveness we've given. I'm proud of you, brother." Tetteh smiled, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the fire burning beside them. "And you, Kwaku. It wasn't an easy road, but we walked it together. That's what matters." The night stretched on, and the village slept peacefully, unaware of the quiet legacy of two brothers who had once betrayed each other,